Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. Back with another Big East team preview here. We've got the Xavier Musketeers, completely new look team, right? Before we dive in, if you are liking the content we've been putting out, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate all the support. But diving in, right, like we said, completely new team, new coach, right? Sean Miller out the door. Conwell to Louisville, Fremantle graduated after what seemed like 6-7 years at Xavier, and a bunch of other guys also either graduated or left in the portal. It's a completely turned over roster, but here we are. Got to still dive in. So offensively, what do we expect from this new team of guys just coming from all over?
Yeah, with this new look roster, I see a lot of depth at the very least. I mean, there are 10 players that played double-digit minutes per game last season. Like, obviously, they were all at different schools. Some guys coming from the mid-ranger ranks, but there's a mix of players who have played primary roles and secondary roles as well. The backcourt looks like it's going to be some sort of mix of Roddie Anderson, who was here last year, but was at Boise State the year before and redshirted. You have Malik Moore coming from Montana, All Right coming from Valparaiso, and Isaiah Walker from Belmont. I think that most likely makes up the backcourt rotation. You have Gabriel Posado, who he's dealing with a meniscus injury right now, so I'm not sure if he's going to start the season on time, but I do expect to see him at some point early in the year, maybe December. They have other pieces: Trey Carroll, Philip Borovichinen, and Jordan Milicevic. The last two guys are coming from New Mexico and followed Pitino, and I think that's going to make up most of the wing forward group. And then the center group, it looks like it's going to be Anthony Robinson coming from Virginia and Papa Njai coming from UNLV, I believe. So there's a lot of guys that have played roles. There's a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things. I'm not going to sit here and tell everyone that I know exactly what this is going to look like. There's a lot of moving parts, but I do think one strength that I could identify at the moment is their offensive rebounding and their transition attack. I think the Anthony Robinson, Trey Carroll duo, who I do think is going to be the starting front court, I think it allows them to be pretty solid in this area. And at the end of the day, I think they see the bulk of the minutes. And when they go to the bench, I think Njai is going to be another solid offensive rebounding piece. And I think the depth is going to help the transition attack. I think they can add fresh bodies into the game all the time. Roddie Anderson and All Right like to push in transition as well. And, we've seen a really good transition offense under Pitino. Obviously, that was led by one of the best guards in the country in Donovan Dent, with True Washington by his side. But I do think this is going to be more of a strength in numbers type situation with this roster. And I do think this is going to be a team that's going to want to push consistently and be able to provide some value because there is athleticism across the board.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that they should be able to push. They do have like some solid shooters as well. Maybe not so much as the guard spot. At least in guys like Roddie Anderson, Isaiah Walker, but like Malik Moore at the guard spot was 41% last year. But then you really have guys like Trey Carroll, right, at 6'7", who shot it at 38% last year. The two guys coming over from New Mexico are like solid, at their size, 6'9", 6'10", capable shooters. So I think that should be a strength. Like it's not going to be a team that wows you shooting the ball, but I think that there are enough like depth pieces. Like you said, there's a bunch of guys that they should be able to piece together like a solid shooting roster, especially with a team who can push the pace. And then, for those guys that aren't necessarily great shooters, one thing that I did notice is they have some really good instincts off the ball. In particular, I kind of noticed it in Walker and Roddie Anderson as like off-ball cutters and kind of like screen readers. So I think that could be a strength as well in their offense when they are in the half court. Is generating open looks off of back cuts, curl cuts, just different things based on, their basketball IQ. So I think this could be like a really good cutting offense, particularly with those two as guys that are kind of more rim reliant guards.
Yeah, for sure. They're experienced guys as well. So I do think there's a lot of older guys on this roster. So I mean, I know there's a lot of turnover and a lot of guys playing with each other for the first time, but I think the experience is really going to help them. The spacing is going to make it a little bit tough for those guys to, find open gaps when they're cutting consistently. But I do think these guys are going to be smart enough, and I think this is a team that's going to be better as the season goes on, particularly on the offensive end.
Yeah. Now in terms of weaknesses, what do you see in this Xavier offense?
Yeah, for me, it's mostly the guard creation and in a half court setting, and I just think the overall half court efficiency is a little bit lacking. I'm not particularly high on the Roddie Anderson and All Right combo. Roddie Anderson has a 42.5% career effective field goal percentage and a 22% turnover rate. Like, he fits into transition based offense, but he brings more value to the defensive side. I think he's going to play a lot more because of that side of the ball, and I'm just not all that high on him as an offensive talent. And Wright, he struggles as an interior scorer due to like a lack of size and burst. I think he's more of a ISO scorer, and he likes to take a lot of shots in the mid range, and he has some talent off the bounce from three. But I also don't really see him as a fantastic playmaker either, and I'm worried about his efficiency when it comes to translating up. I do think the off-ball shooting options on this roster are fine, but I don't think it's enough to open up this half-court offense completely. I think Malik Moore is a super talented perimeter scorer, and he has secondary playmaking abilities, which I think he's the most sure impact for this offense, particularly in the half court. And outside of that, I think there are some concerns. Like, I think Pizzotto should be fine when he returns from injury. He wasn't crazy efficient, but he took some really tough shots at Evansville, and he had a large role for only being in year one, I believe. Yeah, that was his first year of college hoops. So I do think there's room for him to grow, and if he's playing more off the ball, he's going to get some better looks. But I do think there are some concerns across this roster when it comes to how are they going to execute in the half court, and that's where the lack of continuity comes into play, particularly early in the season. And there are some front court spacers like Milicevic, Borovic, and Trey Carroll, but I don't think it's needle moving enough to change how defenses guard the floor spacing element here. Like, they're not talented, like, on the move shooters by any means. They're going to provide more in pick and pop, or they're going to be guys that sit in the corner and knock down threes when they're open. But I just don't think there's enough shooting talent across this roster or on ball creation to really have a consistent half court offense in power conference play.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the front court and their shooting. Pretty much all of their makes, it seems like, come from the corner, right? I mean, you watch the tape, it's like all just kind of like spot up or like on offensive rebound opportunities, kick out to the corner. And sometimes, like, they're not guys that are going to really put it on the deck unless, there were the occasional clips of a guy just running so hard at a closeout in the corner to one of those guys off an offensive rebound. They put it on the deck and get an easy dunk. But, you made this point to me the other day. We haven't seen a guy miss a shot in what, 6 months, right? So it's all like, it's hard to read, right? Because you look at numbers and like they're decent numbers and whatnot, but every guy is making shots on highlight tapes. It's hard to judge, but I think you make another good point about the guard creation. That was my main concern I had written down. Particularly, like, I'm not an all right guy. I think your point about burst is very accurate. Like, I had to watch a bunch of his clips because, in the first couple, I'm like, I feel like he's maybe too slow-footed for this league to really like burst to the rim and create plays for others. And then he showed a couple where I'm like, okay, maybe. But then, you get to some different competition, and ultimately you come out thinking like, I'm not really sure how he's going to like really get downhill, especially, against, a team like, I look at Marquette, right? I think this is a team that is really going to struggle with Marquette, with their guard play and their ability to create in the half court. I think Marquette could really cause some issues. So for me, I think it's like you said, that on-ball creation that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And using Wright as an example, like he can put up raw numbers. He averaged 15 and a half points per game, shot at 38% from three. But in this day and age, like talent evaluation is really the most important aspect for coaches. And when it comes to predicting outcomes of games, like for a guy like me, like I bet the sport a decent amount. So being able to evaluate talent, like Torvik and Ken Palm can only do so much with their rating systems. Like it really comes down to, can you evaluate whether a guy coming from the mid-range or ranks can translate up, or can a power conference guy translate to another power conference team in a new scheme? Like, and I think Wright is a really good example of this, a guy that can put up raw numbers, but we don't think his burst is power conference level. And I think, in my opinion, he's a backup guard who's going to play more spot minutes. And if he doesn't impact the game in other areas, there's a real chance that he could really fall out of the rotation completely and be a guy that's just playing more garbage minutes. So yeah, that's a really good point. It's like, you really need to watch the tape if you're trying to predict outcomes and really predict how these teams are going to shape up.
Yeah, no, it's hard to just look at statistics from a transfer of, from small college to power conference. So on the defensive side, I mean, they have, right, two guys in Papa Injai and Anthony Robinson, both of who didn't play a ton of minutes last year. I think both were under 30% of their team's minutes. But, right, Anthony Robinson, 7.6% block rate, Papa Injai, 10.2% block rate. So I do think like there is some size and rim protection ability here, right? Both guys are 6'10" or taller. So I could see that being a strength of this unit. I think it should be with assuming both kind of step into bigger roles effectively.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, they're definitely going to have to. I think they're 50-50 split at the end of the day. And I think they've run into their share of foul trouble in the past, which has sort of limited them. And they've obviously had guys ahead of them in the pecking order, which yeah, it's obviously just like guys like Buchanan and Jacob Kofi playing in front of Anthony Robinson at Virginia. So it was, and like Bear Cherry playing in front of NJ at UNLV. So I do think these guys are more ready for a prominent role. It's good that they have each other here to play that 50-50 split. And I think they're going to be able to provide some value up front. And I think the talent and depth in general and the athleticism, I think, is probably the main strength of the Xavier team. It's kind of been the MO of past Pitino teams, particularly his New Mexico teams in the past 2 years. They finished 23rd and 16th in adjusted defensive efficiency nationally in each of the last 2 years, which is rather impressive for a non-Power 5 team to be able to accumulate all that talent and athleticism. And I do think he did a pretty good job this time around. Like I like Trey Carroll quite a bit as a two-way player. I think he's going to provide, some weak side rim protection, defensive rebounding, an ability to defend in space when he really needs to. And I think they have some other guys on this roster like Milicevic and Borovichnin are fine. I think there are kind of weak points on that New Mexico defense, but I mean, they're not slouches by any means. That was a really good defense last year, and I think the perimeter group is pretty solid as well. Like I mentioned, I think Roddie Anderson is more of a defense first guard, and that's kind of what he's been brought in for, is making plays on the defensive end and then leading the transition attack.
Yeah, no, I like, to your point about Trey Carroll, he's a guy that I really like as a not just on the defensive end, but both ends of the floor. It's at 6'7", just kind of being that versatile sort of swingman that can guard multiple positions. No, we're not talking offense right now, but can provide a bunch on the offensive end, perimeter and interior. But then on the defensive end, right, almost a 5% block rate, 2% steal rate. I think he can impact and guard multiple positions and should be a very, very important player, I think, to this Xavier defense and the team in general. But in terms of weaknesses, what do you see in this Xavier defense?
There's not a particular weakness that really stands out to me. I think it's just more of this is a team that's going to need to figure it out on the fly against certain matchups. And I don't think there's a particular lockdown wing defender on this roster. Like Walker is a little bit slower laterally. Malik Moore, where it's kind of a remains to be seen what he can do on the defensive end. He played in a really weak defensive league, so I'm not completely sure what he's bringing to the table. Posado coming off of the torn meniscus, and besides that, there's just not a ton. Like, I think Roddie Anderson's probably the best perimeter defender on this roster, but he can only do so much. These wing pieces have positional size, but are they truly switchable, and can they truly lock down a particular matchup? I would say no. And then we don't really know what the front court pieces of Anthony Robinson and NJ are going to bring to the table with more volume. So I guess if both of them flop, I think this defense kind of becomes a weak point.
Yeah, that was one for me, not so much a weakness, but a concern of like two bigs that didn't play high minutes at all last year, like I said a few minutes ago. And so it's a concern now that they're both going to be asked to play more significant roles, right? I think Njai played 30% and Robinson was 18 or 19%. So they're both going to be, taking a significant jump anywhere from 20 to 30% each in minutes played. So I think it's a concern. They didn't get necessarily a ton of opportunity last year to, learn how to be effective rim protectors. Like the numbers show, but, it was for them, they could just kind of go out there because they weren't the main option and they could get away with being undisciplined at times, right? Because it's like, okay, I pick up 2 or 3 fouls. Like I'm just not going to come back in. And that's fine because they don't necessarily need me. But now this is a Xavier team that needs them to stay on the floor. And be their rim anchors on the defensive end. So it's certainly a concern more than it is a weakness. So like you said, it could end up, if they do both struggle, then it could be a defense that's sitting at the bottom of the Big East.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I don't think it's a defense that will finish at the bottom. I think they're strength in numbers and guys that have played roles at, some at the Power 5 level, some at the, high mid-major level. I think they're going to be able to translate up better than a lot of these low major guys going to different schools. So I think they're going to be competent on defense and both sides of the ball, but it's just a matter of where the ceiling is at. I think kind of remains to be seen.
Yeah. Now shifting into MVP and X Factor, where did you go here?
For my MVP, I went with Trey Carroll. I think he provides the highest floor for this team, and I think he has the most, not unique, but most versatile skill set. And I don't really think he was ever able to flourish at FAU. I know he played more of a bench role with the team that went to the Final Four, and then the year after, last year, he started to show a little bit in that new system with John Jacobs, averaged 12 points, 5 rebounds in 22 minutes per game. I think he probably should have played even more than that and had a larger role. He's a guy that can play through the post, can play through pick and pop, can do a lot of different things with the ball in his hands and even with the ball not in his hands. I think he's a good cutter as well, and he's a good guy that you can play in the dunker spot, or maybe not the dunker spot, but he's going to provide value in a lot of areas. Like we mentioned, he can knock it down from the corner. He's an on and off ball player who can play inside and out. So I think he has the highest floor, and I think he'll probably see more of a minutes share. I know this is a deep roster, but I think he's the guy that projects to become a star on this team more than anybody else. And then for my X factor, I went with Malik Moore from who's coming from Montana. I think his shooting is pretty imperative. I think he's going to provide value as a secondary playmaker as well. I think his movement shooting is going to be very important to open up this half court offense. And he shot at 41% on 5 attempts per game. And I do think he's a pretty sure bet to knock it down at a similar clip, or at least he has the talent to do so. And if he's able to do that, I think this team can be 4th or 5th in the Big East, or maybe even a little bit better with the concerns across this conference.
Yeah. For me, MVP, I was down to either Malik Moore or Trey Carroll. I think ultimately I went Trey Carroll because of his impact on both ends. Malik Moore, like, this is sad, but I watched quite a bit of Montana basketball last year, and I do have some concerns with him just kind of turning into a strictly like catch and shoot guy on this team. There were games last year where he kind of would disappear at times. It felt like, and like if he is just this catch and shoot guy, he needs to be very elite at that for this team. But I don't know as if his impact on the whole game, he's not going to be much of a creator, I don't think. So I do have some concerns there. I think Trey Carroll is more surefire in terms of what he's going to be able to provide on both ends, like I talked about a few minutes ago. And then X Factor, I actually went with a guy we haven't really talked about a ton. You mentioned him being injured, but Gabriel Posado, I think that he's kind of an intriguing piece because, like you said, last year took a bunch of tough shots, was playing for a not so great team in Evansville, but he has some ability, I think, as a shooter. I think he has some ability as like a transition piece. He's very explosive, right? They threw a lot of lobs to him in transition, seemed to like dunk a lot of stuff. So I do think like he's kind of intriguing in a role where he's not asked to do as much. I think he can be solid on the defensive end. So I kind of like see some sneaky upside in Posado, assuming he gets healthy here. And I think he could provide kind of a punch for Xavier.
Yeah, I mean, he has an interesting skill set, and I do think if the game opens up for him a little bit more, I do think there's some upside for him as a two-way piece on this roster. It's just, I think there are a lot of options that could potentially break out here, but there's no one that I'm really willing to bet is going to.
Yeah. Now, ceiling, floor, bold prediction. What do you think here?
Yeah, I had the ceiling as like 4th or 5th in the Big East. It feels like I'm putting every team in this bucket because I truly think that is the ceiling for every team besides St. John's and UConn, who are going to finish 1-2 most likely. But that's kind of where I had them. And when you're 4th or 5th, I think you're in the bubble conversation at the least. If this conference surprises us a little bit more than we think, we've talked about it. They're probably only a 3-bid league, but if maybe there's a 4th or 5th, and I think Xavier's in that realm of possibility. And I think the floor is probably in the 9-10 range. There's a lot of moving pieces here, so there's a lot of things that could potentially go wrong, and then it could be a potentially poor year one of the Pitino era.
Yeah, I said 4th is the ceiling. I don't know. I'm not confident enough in this team with all the new pieces to say, they can get to 3rd. And then I said 9th as the floor. Again, it's just kind of one of those situations where it's a new roster, a lot of uncertainty, guys kind of transferring up the front court, like we discussed, guys taking on bigger roles. There is an avenue for this team to finish more towards the bottom of the Big East, I think. And actually, like, that's kind of where Torvik projects them to finish 9th, I think. So it kind of remains to be seen what year 1 of the Pitino era will look like. My bold prediction, I went all right, ends up out of the primary rotation by midway through the season. It may be sooner, but I don't really like his game translating to this. And that's like, not to like knock against him really, because I think he can be impactful at a lot of schools in this country at a lower level, but I just don't really see him being impactful on really either end of the floor consistently in a Power 5 league.
Yeah, I would agree with that take. And I think if he's out of the rotation, I think it's a really bad sign for the Xavier team, because I'm not all that high on Roddie Anderson's offensive game, creating all the ball. And there's not really many other perimeter guys, like maybe an Isaiah Walker, but I think he's more of a role player, connector piece sort of play type. So, yeah, I definitely I would agree with that take that he's not like, all right, it's not going to be the highest impact out there. But for my bold prediction, I think Trey Carroll is going to make an all-conference team. I just think, he only played 22 minutes a game at Florida Atlantic last year, so I think I can consider this to be a bold take. And with more usage, they're going to have to take the pressure off the guards somehow. And I think Trey Carroll working through the low and high post and a lot of different areas on the floor is hopefully going to open up some things for the half court offense. So I'll say he makes an all conference team. I don't think he's a first teamer by any means, but there's a chance he could be a second or third.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps things up for our takes on the new look Xavier Musketeers. We'll see you next time on the Mainly Hoops podcast.